Hello, everyone. Harold Simansky here of mbaMission, talking to you today about choosing the right business school for round 2 and round 3. Obviously, there's a lot that's going to be relevant if you're just starting to this process. If you're thinking about, okay, what business school is right for you? I recognize also just for round 2, round 3, people may have some specific questions, and we'll certainly get to them as well. With that in mind, we're going to wait probably just about another 2 minutes, and then we'll dig right in. Okay, everyone, we're back and we're getting ready to talk about choosing the right business school for round 2 and round 3. Obviously, there's going to be a lot to cover here, and we are really going to start right off based on where I think a lot of you are coming from. And Abhijat and I were just talking about the fact that this was a particularly hard year. It was a particularly hard year for foreign students. It was a particularly hard year from folks from India. So with that in mind, it would not surprise me if some of you are here today because you maybe did not have as much success as you hoped to in round 1. So with that in mind, we're going to dig in terms of not just choosing business schools generally, but also choosing business schools specifically for round 2 or round 3, specifically if you tried some things and it didn't work out for you. So with that in mind, I want you to keep some questions in the back of your mind, which we will be speaking to a little bit further in this presentation. First of all, did you apply round 1? How did you do? Very quickly, most of you know, it is harder to get in for round 2, round 3, particularly for international applicants. Does it change anything? Probably not, but just want to make you aware of it. Should you be considering other programs at this point? The reality is I tell people you apply to the program and the type of program that you want to, the one you want to go to. You also apply to schools that you want to go to. That is without question, but obviously there are going to be some other considerations. Then you ask yourself, do you really want an MBA, or do you want a brand name school, or do you want to be in the US? The answers might be the same across all of them, or maybe one is more important than the other. Maybe you want to be in the US and you don't care. Maybe you need an MBA for your job, or maybe you have to go to that top Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, whatever school. Otherwise, it's not going to be important to you. So keep all of these questions in mind. This will always be in the background as we think about schools. So let's get to what I would say your more classic questions around choosing the right business school. The first thing is finding the right type of MBA program, which we'll go through. Finding the right target schools. Based on the program you choose, there's going to be different schools. And finally, about mbaMission and some Q&A. I'll keep the Q&A to the end, just to make sure that everyone has some time. We will have some time at the end. About mbaMission, there's a lot I can say about it. Maybe the most important thing is mbaMission. We offer a free 30-minute consult to help talk through with you exactly what your concerns might be about applying to business school, what your candidacy might look like, the general landscape, really 30 minutes to ask anything you want with one of our counselors. And this is not a sales call. If you want to see what we sell, you can see on our website. Obviously, we're happy to talk to you about what some of our offerings are, but that is not the purpose of these calls. So let's start off with finding the right type of MBA program. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I think the reality is most of you know what you're looking for. So with that in mind, let's just jump right on in. So very quickly, you have different types of programs. There's the MBA, generally 2 years, 1 to 2 years, I should say. A part-time MBA, that can actually take quite a bit longer, and it is something that you generally do while you're working. And an executive MBA for those who are farther along in their career and who are father-in-law in their career, and at this point may need to develop some very specific skills as they move up the corporate ranks, as they move up the corporate ladder. So for some people, it'll be obvious which program is right for them. For other people, maybe less so. So with regard to finding the right target schools, okay, let's think about the different ways of differentiating MBA programs. Just the length of the program, location, that includes not just US cities, but maybe cities across the world, the class size or structure, how big is the school, how is that meaningful or not, curriculum, what are they teaching you? Business schools teach some things that are the same, some things that are different. Pedagogy, how are they teaching you? Sometimes they use something called the case method, which puts a lot of pressure on the student. Sometimes you may end up doing more of a traditional approach, which is something that most students have already seen in terms of lectures. Academic specialization, recruitment focus. I will talk more to this, but certainly there's some schools that do better and send more folks to investment banking, more folks to consulting, more folks to brand management. And it's always worth considering what you want to do and which business school will be the best for you to land in that place. I think Alumni Base is interesting. And what I mean by that is some schools that are very big, they have these huge alumni bases. University of Texas, for example. University of Southern California, huge alumni bases. But if they don't have a great alumni network that you live, how relevant is that? And that's something, again, to explore. Facilities. That's something I'm a little bit lukewarm on. As some schools, it's like an arms race and it's beautiful. It's like a 5-star hotel. Other schools, less so. But at the same point, it is something certainly to take in considerations. Rankings and reputations. This is the one that I think most people are interested in. I think that this frequently is the tail that's wagging the dog. So from that perspective, I would say we're going to talk about it probably from the perspective, what do they really mean for you based on some other choices that you made. As you can see on the right-hand side, there are insider guides. There's a lot of free material on our website that is certainly worth looking at. So with that in mind, let's dig a little deeper here. Okay, finding the right target school. First of all, this is the length of the program. You can see a lot of the European schools have shorter programs when compared to the US schools, which will have longer programs. What I have right now is just some of the European schools. Do you know the US schools are 2-year programs? Generally, European schools are all sorts of different lengths. You have the Oxford, Cambridge, 12 months in and out. You have, let's say, an INSEAD, which actually has a couple of different choices, one with an internship and one without. Similarly with LBS or similarly with ASADE. It is important for you, among other things, to recognize the length of the program, what makes sense for you in terms of whether or not you need an internship, as well as cost. A 12-month program is just going to be cheaper than a 24-month program, and how much does that affect things? Another thing to consider is just location. Urban campus, college town. I think that this is this is always relevant. Are you a person who needs a university city? Are you a person who really wants to honestly be in a very academic environment, like let's say in Oxford, let's say University of Michigan Ross, and again you are in a college town. It's cheap to live there. They really make great efforts in order to get you to the place you want to be from a employment perspective, because you're not going to find anything around there. Okay, so from that perspective, college town generally, not always, has some great professional support, career services. Other schools less so. Urban campus, a lot is more dependent on you. New York University, boom, right in the middle of New York City, actually the southern tip of Manhattan. Great school, wonderful school. You're surrounded by New York. Some people love it, some people hate it. The reality is also every type of business exists in New York. You can certainly find your way to practically any job there, but you have to do a lot of it on your own. And just recognizing that is important. So, and just walking through here, here's a list of urban campuses, what we say urban college hybrids, college towns. Do a little bit of research. You see what this is all about. And again, it's not a perfect science here by any means at all. University, Wharton, yes, it's in Philadelphia, but it's on little island in Philadelphia. Same thing with Chicago. Duke is really not the same type of college town that, let's say, Dartmouth is. It's pretty close to a city. Tuck, University of Virginia, it's like you need a couple of mules and a camel in order to get there. Very far away from anything. Okay. Similarly, urban campuses across Europe, same idea here. Now, another differentiator is certainly the class size. Do you want that intimate setting where you pretty quickly know every one of your classmates, or do you want something bigger? And that bigger is sometimes important, not just because you have more people who you can make connections with, more people that you will all be future alumni together, but also this idea, is it big enough to be small? At Wharton, you can find a club for practically anything because it's 900 students. And what's nice about Wharton is each club is going to have different people. At some of the smaller schools, let's say Tuck, for example, everyone who's in the wine club is also in the spirits club, was also in the beer club. In Wharton, that may not be the case. You'll connect with different people in different environments. So not a simple answer in terms of class size. So you see quite a wide range here. And it's a question of, okay, what makes sense for you in terms of how do you perform best? Whether that's someone who you want to be in that intimate environment, sort of everyone knows you, or someone who wants to take a lower profile and really just find their own niche among people like them. And maybe it's only a small set of people like them, but the reality is that it is something that is so valuable. You develop great relationships. Similarly with European schools, quite a range in terms of how big the classes are. When it also comes to thinking about the class size, you can also think about, well, how is the class organized in terms of, are you in the same classes with the same group of people all day? In fact, at Harvard Business School, there's 90 in a classroom. The professors come, you all sit in the same classroom, and the professors come to you as opposed to the other way. Based on my experience at MIT Sloan, 70 of you, next class is maybe it's people like you, maybe it's other classmates, different group of people. And and if you don't know anything about MIT, classrooms are way spread out. They use numbers to identify the classrooms. Nobody ever knows what the numbers are. So it actually is quite a little odyssey there. But it's also team building because it's like getting lost in a cave. All of you cling together and work your way through the bowels of MIT all together. And again, there's all sorts of different schools. NYU, you may have classes across a number of different buildings. As far as UVA, you're just in one great building. Kellogg, one great building, beautiful building. Kellogg just built it a few years ago. And again, it's a question of, will you develop close relationships with a subset of folks in your class, or will you develop relationships really across the class? And a lot of that has to do with class size as well as the section size. We then get to how people are taught. One is just flexible versus mandatory curriculum. Flexible curriculum means you can take a lot of what you want on your own. Chicago Booth is known for its flexible curriculum. There's only one course that's really required. Not quite as simple as that, because you are required to take courses in certain fields, but they're not dictated to you. But if you're an accountant and you've spent a lot of time in consulting, you go to Booth, you can really fine tune your own curriculum. Maybe you don't take accounting. Maybe you don't take a strategy course. And the flip side, whether it's Stanford, whether it's MIT, they feel basically the same way. MIT Sloan just has the first semester is required. After that, you can take whatever you want. Stanford, a little bit different in the sense of courses are required, but the reality is that you can opt out of courses. You can place out of courses. Again, an accountant doesn't have to take accounting. Mandatory curriculum, you get there, they're going to tell you what you have to learn. Harvard Business School, it's the first year. Tuck, it's the first year. Darden, I think, is the first year. This is particularly valuable for folks who may be new to business. The reality is there's nothing, they don't even know what to study. Well, HBS, Tuck, or Darden are going to tell them what to study. You can see here, curriculum flexible versus mandatory, some more, some less. I think that's the answer. And certainly the same with European schools. Another way of approaching it is just, how are schools teaching you? And generally, there's three big ways that they teach you. The first is what's called just old traditional lecture courses. All of you have done it. All of you have been in a classroom, teacher up front, very frontal, as they say. You get a lot of information from an expert. And at that point, then you know you're getting the most important information, the information you can leverage off of. Frequently, it's also the most sophisticated information. The flip side is the case method, where basically you are given a business scenario, and you as a team, meaning 5 or 6 of your classmates, have to sort of really have to figure things out, have to sit yourself, play the role of CEO, and see where things land. And that's in itself is very interesting. It mimics what a CEO may actually be doing. And you certainly develop a very close relationship with your teammates. And each of you, and if it all goes well, you're really stretching your legs and learning many different things, and it relies very much on you. Which is better, which is worse, depends on who you are. Case method, there are only a few schools that are 100% case method. That's Harvard Business School, that's University of Virginia, and that is one Ivy, one of the Canadian schools. Something to consider in terms of how you learn best. Case method is a high-pressure situation, honestly. You can be put on the spot. And it builds your ability to think on your feet. It also builds your ability to articulate an argument. Lecture course, you can hide a little bit more. At the same point, what is required for you to learn is higher. If you're going to learn finance, you're going to learn things like CAPM. You're going to learn how to manipulate financial equations. Same thing, some classes more, some classes less. Some schools more, some schools less. What you can see, though, is every school does some of each. They also have thrown in here experiential learning. These are things like class trips. These are things like individual consulting projects with a local company. So again, you're learning through experience, some more, some less. So there's no one pure school. Probably the closest is the Harvard Business School. But again, a lot just depends on how you feel like you learn best, as well as this idea once you're into a couple schools, maybe that's a consideration. Same thing, you'll see case studies versus lectures versus experiential learning, some more, some less. Same thing with international schools, some more, some less. I think what's important sometimes is think about the academic specialization and what the recruitment focus is. You're going to know what some of these are, and you're not going to know what some of these are. And some of them actually can be quite deceiving in terms of what you think schools do best and what it's just clear that they may be doing some other things great. So what you really have to do, and I always encourage people to pull the employment reports. Every business school, you can download the employment report, meaning where graduates got jobs over the last few years, and think about where people actually got jobs. And that will be indicative of really what the focus of the school is and how maybe you're not quite right as you assess a school. Chicago, Booth, Columbia, and NYU Stern, are they just finance schools? Absolutely not. Some of the best, maybe the best entrepreneurial resources I'm seeing right now is Chicago Booth. They do a great job. Polsky Center is relatively new. They can help you find a job in a startup before you even start school. So again, dig deep into each program because you may be pleasantly surprised. Kellogg, only marketing school. Honestly, Kellogg is doing finance now really terrifically. It's a school that honestly does a lot of things great. And that's why it's a school I happen to love, because when you get there, you can really do whatever you want. Berkeley and Haas, Berkeley, Yale, nonprofit schools? Maybe. But are they that much more focused on nonprofits than other schools? Probably not. Traditionally, Yale sent a huge number of folks into nonprofits, into social impact, into double bottom line companies. And if you look at the employment report, that's not necessarily true anymore. Yale is only sending about 10, 12% of their class into nonprofits. And the reality is most other schools are going to see pretty similar numbers. Berkeley, Haas, pretty close to Yale. They're still sending the vast majority of folks out into the for-profit sector. No matter what, I think anybody, no matter what round you apply, really has to think about how to get to know the school. Because for most schools, it's really Um, for most schools, it is really important that you explain to them not just why an MBA, but why at that particular school. And the schools see themselves as quite different. There are some schools that, in fact, are very sensitive to this idea that you see them as unique and you can learn special things from them that maybe you don't learn at other schools or maybe you don't learn as effectively at other schools. One school that's particularly sensitive is MIT. MIT wants to make sure that it's not just your first choice, not just your first top choice school, but also maybe even your only school. And they're really committed to this idea they are different. The flip side is Harvard Business School. They don't care why you're applying to Harvard Business School. They know. They don't care why you chose the school. They don't care about your intimate knowledge of the school. They know why they're being chosen. Most schools are somewhere in between. What will really set an application apart is your ability to communicate what you like about that school that goes beyond the website. What really sets your application apart is if you've spoken to people, if you can talk about maybe courses, classes, clubs that is beyond the website. Interest matters. I always tell folks, if you love them, they'll love you. You just have to show that love. Okay. And here we get into it in terms of Kellogg Marketing School. Yes, but great real estate program. Wharton Finance School. Yes, but probably the best healthcare program out there. Incredibly strong international business school because of the Louder program. And also, again, startups. They themselves built a new building a couple of years ago. It actually has a really nice reputation of entrepreneurs coming out of Wharton. Differentiator is the Alumni Base. I think this is really important because as you think about the 2 years at your business school, it only lasts 2 years. An alumni network lasts for the rest of your life. I always tell folks, particularly if they're coming from foreign countries, is okay, see where the alumni live. Go take a look at wherever you live. Go see how big the local Wharton alumni club is. For some areas, it may be huge. For some areas, it may not be. It may be pretty small. Candidly, a school like Tuck, fairly small alumni network, particularly the farther away you get from the Northeast. Other schools, University of Texas, there's hundreds of thousands of University of Texas alumni out there. And they take loyalty to their school very seriously. But again, that is certainly the case in the US. Maybe in India, maybe in China, that may not be the case. So it's really worth taking a look at how active the alumni are in your region. Okay, finding the right target school. Again, NYU, Wharton, huge networks. The reality is that, okay, so what? If it's not local to you, then it really doesn't matter. Okay, again, walking through the alumni base here, point not to be lost. I want to say a lot about the facilities at each school. Most schools are great. There's been a true arms race in terms of what's been happening as far as business schools building great buildings. There are certainly some things that are particularly interesting that's happening. For example, Carnegie Mellon Tepper, a school I love, they just actually built a new business school, but it's right at the center of campus. And what it's basically saying is everything that they touch at Tepper is looked through a business lens. And Tepper, great engineering school, great product management school, great school for technology. But again, Tepper, Carnegie Mellon, front and center. For other schools, less so. For example, again, it may be a school like Michigan. It may be a school like Haas. It may be a school like other schools where it's not at the center of campus. It's sort of pushed off to the side. That's fine. Duke, it's a little bit not exactly center of campus. That's fine, but recognizing maybe it's a little bit less integrated. But when it comes to facilities, I'd say think about a lot of other things before you think about facilities. Okay, we're going to get into rankings to some degree, but before I do that, let's just take a moment. We'll go through some of your questions. Okay. Okay, welcome again. Mind telling us where you are joining us from? India, love it. Let me see here. Vietnam, Indonesia, terrific. There certainly seems to be a number of even European folks there. But again, before we get into rankings, it's worth going through some of these questions. Let me see here. Okay, cool. Okay, of these, are these factors in the order of importance? Rankings and reputation is the last factor to consider about. What I would say to you is, for most people, ranking reputation is the most important thing. So that's why I've sent it to last. But I think the point of this exercise is to say there's a lot more thinking that you need to do as far as this goes. How much work experience do you need before starting an MBA? 2-year MBA, 2 to 5 years. Even generally, women show a little bit fewer years of experience, men a little bit more. Average age of business school is about 28. Women skew a little bit younger. Maybe for women it's 27. Men skew a little bit older. Maybe it's 29. That said, you have some schools, they take you right under undergraduate, and there are some schools you'll see a 35-year-old. Which European schools value a candidate's entrepreneurial work experience the most? A couple of different answers here. One is probably Oxford and Cambridge, as far as who value your entrepreneurial experience most. That said, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to explain what business school makes sense for you. Because if you're an entrepreneur and you want to go into entrepreneurship, save the money and put it into your own company. Someone from Nigeria, awesome. Cameroon, awesome. Which school in Europe gives more weightage to the GMAT score? Traditionally speaking, though not always, European schools just weigh the GMAT score a lot less. And again, there's no right answer here, but generally lower scores at European schools, and they're weighed a lot less. Which schools in Europe gives more? Okay. Presentation. What about deferred programs? Number of deferred programs out there. Harvard Business School has one. MIT now has started deferring people. Stanford has one. I think University of Virginia has one. Yale has one, which is a little bit different. Got to just do the research. Presentation looks blurry. I'm sorry. But so in that case, let's get into the rankings a little bit, which I know folks are very interested in. Okay. Different places to find rankings, and what does it really mean? So first off, it's an imperfect measure. I think you guys know that. And how do we know it's imperfect measure? Is they bounce around so much. And if one school was always the same and always great, then the reality is it would be consistently number one. You'll see Harvard even Business School bounce around a lot. Rankings come and go, yes. Starting point and not the ending point. Again, another piece of data. Is it worth it to go through to a top 10 school if back home there are no alumni from that school? Then probably not. Is it worth going to a top 10 school if the jobs that you want, they don't recruit there? Probably not. So that's always something to think about. Reputable rankings, number of different places are ranking folks, ranking different schools. So what I'm going to really push back on is this idea here of what's important when you think about a ranking. And if you say to yourself, oh, I can only go to the top schools, I will tell my clients, are you sure about that? This idea here of, okay, what is your real goal in going to business school, particularly an American business school? Some of it may be just to get out of whatever country you're in and spend some time in the US. In that case, maybe it's worth it to go for a lower tier school where you will get a scholarship. Have you thought about that? Or if it is to get a job in a specific field, in that case, maybe you look for those schools that may or may not be top 10 schools, but do a great job of placing people in the role that you want to be in. So just to, again, there's 1,000 schools out there. I know 1,000 schools, but let's talk about some schools you may not be so aware of and where they place people. University of Washington Foster. If you want to go be a product manager at a Microsoft, at an Amazon, which are all out in Seattle, at a Boeing, then again, the operations role for Boeing, then look at University of Washington Foster. Easier to get into, not easy, but easier to get into. How about if you want to go into healthcare? There happens to be a great school in Nashville, Tennessee called Owen at Vanderbilt University, which is a straight pipeline to healthcare. And healthcare across all sorts of different dimensions. One is working for big healthcare providers. One is doing entrepreneurship in health. One is connecting people to biotech and some of the big hubs for biotech, like Chicago. There's basically a pipeline from Owen in Nashville straight to Chicago. And what I would say to you is a school worth investigating. And this sort of gets into the issue around location. It's in Nashville, a wonderful city, a great, great city, a fun city. So something to consider. Olin for entrepreneurship, School many of you may not heard of, Washington University in St. Louis, a top 10, 15 undergraduate education in the US. It also a great business school. Where it is, St. Louis, a city in the middle of the country, used to be one of the biggest cities in the US 100 years ago, not so much anymore. Wonderful city, but a great entrepreneurship community. Just a lot of smart people doing interesting things there. You want to go into real estate. Best real estate program in the US business schools are University of North Carolina. Again, a school you may not have considered, but basically everyone knows University of North Carolina, a top 20-ish school, best real estate program. If you want to go to brand management, work at CPG company, consumer product company. People frequently think about Kellogg. Well, guess what? The school that sends the most people to brand management is University of Wisconsin. Great college town. Again, many of you may not have heard of it. Great college town. You'd have a lot of fun there. Plus, you get a job working at some of the big Procter & Gamble, Gillette. You'll work at some of the truly big brand companies, Frito-Lay. You want to go off to Los Angeles. You want to be in the film industry, the TV industry. Chapman University, again, a school most of you have not heard of, a top 50 school even. But the reality is that, again, has a pipeline right into media in Los Angeles, something to consider. You want to go into human resources. You want to go into being the chief people officer at a company. There's another university in Utah called Brigham Young University, founded by a sect of Christianity called Mormons. And it's in the mountains, beautiful place, but they do HR better than practically anyone else. They take it very, very seriously in a way that other business schools may not. When it comes to consulting, any of the top 10, 15, you'll find McKinsey on campus. So from that perspective, I think you should be realistic and understand, even though I go to school X, Y, or Z that maybe I didn't think of, guess what? I can still land at a McKinsey. Here's just some other schools that I love. And for all sorts of different reasons, and we don't have to get in now. Notre Dame, Indiana, biggest Catholic school in the country. Indiana Kelley, a place that actually sends a surprising number of people to investment banking. University of Minnesota Carlson, if you like Berkeley, you'd love Carlson, just it's colder. Boise State, probably the best. I keep on saying the best. Really a top school for entrepreneurship. Also a top school if you want to go to business school when you're very young. 1-2 years out of undergraduate, even directly out of undergraduate. Boise, Idaho is this starting to be this hotbed of entrepreneurship. It's the new, if you're familiar, it is the new Boulder. Boulder, University of Colorado is, and Boulder was the new Berkeley. It was the new Silicon Valley. So you can see how these things get spun out. Arizona State, W.P. Carey, does a lot online. Very good school. People get good jobs. Something else that we've started talking to people about more and more, the fact that it's sometimes hard to get a visa and the whole citizenship and immigration issues are sort of tied up a little bit in the U.S. Look at a Canadian school. Frequently, you have some of the same recruiters and wonderful schools, great education. At IB, you'd get the full case method, which absolutely is valuable for folks who want to learn how to think on their feet. University of British Columbia, just an hour from Seattle. So the same companies that recruit in Seattle, Amazon, Microsoft, Nike, are probably coming to University of British Columbia. It's in Vancouver, voted the #1 city in North America or something. It's almost like I don't have a lot to say about the rankings. They are what they are. By all means, take a look at them. It's really dependent on where you live. Financial Times, more European focused. U.S. Journalism Report, really the grandfather of all schools, of all rankings. You may stumble across some schools there that you would not have thought otherwise. So very quickly here, as you look at these top 10 schools, recognize also that it at least may highlight for you, again, a school like Carnegie Mellon, again, like WashU. USC is a school that actually is so strong across the board, huge alumni network. Use these for what it is, which is maybe identifying some schools for you, maybe then you taking the next steps and understanding, okay, what happens to these graduates? Where do they go? How much money do they make? Do they stay in the U.S. or do they go home? That's always the question. I think rankings and reputation, you have to also be realistic. And I don't think there's any question here. Very few people turn down Harvard Business School. Very people turn down Stanford. Very few people turn down a Wharton. And I think that's something to consider. So no matter how much these you see in these rankings, obviously they're imperfect. I have to be honest with you. So you look at the economists, for example. Not that many people are turning down NYU to go to Ross. Does that mean it's not always the case? Of course. There are certainly different reasons why people go to different schools, and we talked about them. But again, these are just the rankings are just one piece of data to look at, and maybe the best thing they can do is help you understand, see what the reputation is of some of the lower-ranked schools. Same thing with European schools. It's one of those things. HEC Paris, it doesn't surprise me. It's really rising in the rankings. They've put a lot of money, energy into pushing up their ranking. Does that take away anything from INSEAD, the other big French school? Not at all. And the reality is that INSEAD, if you want to go into consulting, INSEAD's the place to be. We can compare one school to the other, Chicago Booth, Dartmouth. What I will say to you is when I went to look at business schools many, many years ago, Chicago Booth was not even in my consideration. It was a school that was in a very tough area of Chicago. It was a school that was finding its way. At the time, I don't know what the ranking was, but I didn't even consider it. Dartmouth Tuck, I went up, I looked at it, and it was in nowhere land, and I have a wife who needed a job, so that also, no matter how well-ranked these schools are now, no matter how ranked they were, obviously there's a ton of considerations that go into that. Okay, I'm going to give you a little talk about mbaMission, and then we're going to take each one of your questions one at a time. About mbaMission, I'm a consultant there. I've been there for about 2 years. I did this type of work beforehand. We think we're the best out there. I worked at another firm. I can guarantee you we're the best out there. Part of the reason, and you just have to look at our reviews. You just have to look at who works there. You have to look at our backgrounds. You have to look at the fact that we're full-time consultants. I think at the end of the day, you will be well served by working with mbaMission. And there's all sorts of different reasons. And one reason to work with mbaMission is because we just have a great team there. And if I ever bump into a question I don't know, or if there's ever a school that I'm not familiar with, somebody else will be. And we can certainly make sure that you are connecting to the school that's right for you. What I also tell people is, quite honestly, working with an mbaMission's consultant is a very personal relationship. You may end up saying things to that person that you don't say to anyone else. So from that perspective, make sure whoever you speak to, that you can have that type of relationship with them. Certainly worth really exploring. So, and maybe the only way to really do that appropriately is by speaking to this person for an extended period of time. That's one of the reasons that we offer our 30-minute free consult. Again, it's an opportunity for us to answer your questions about your profile, about business schools generally, about a strategy. It's also a great way for you to get to know us and ask yourself, is this someone I can work with? Is this somebody I can spend 20 hours on the phone with? And again, sometimes yes, sometimes no. There are other ways of connecting with us. We have a lot of free content, career primers. Go on our website, download a bunch of free stuff. You can find it all there. All sorts of different services. The most comprehensive is what we call the start to finish package. Best for people who need to tell a great story. Best for people who aren't used to doing introspection work, because a great story for business school is unique. It's specific. It reflects only you. No one else can tell the same story. You can also buy their services hourly. It's best for people who know exactly what they want. You need an hours of help with your resume. We can do that. If you reach the point where you need an interview, we do mock interviews included in our comprehensive package. You can buy it a la carte if you are only buying hourly. I think one thing, and we're doing it right now, is the Wharton team-based discussion. For those of you who don't know, the Wharton interview is quite different from others. You are interviewed as if you were in a team of 5 or 6 people. You're put in the room of 5 and 6 people, and actually they observe you. And mbaMission is the only firm that does actual simulations of these. We'll put you in the, quote, virtual room with 5 or 6 people and see and provide you guidance on how you perform under those circumstances. Pre-application strategy, if it's more than 2 years out, 1 year out, and you're thinking about applying to business school, maybe you get a pre-application strategy and we start setting you up for a successful business school application. Our team, selected members, we have a lot on our team. There's probably 25 of us. Everyone has their different niches. Everyone has their different bit of backgrounds. Jeremy's the founder of the firm. Absolutely fantastic. He's really the one who has this huge amount of knowledge and experience. Katie, Harvard Business School, Harvard Law School, McKinsey, worked as a Stanford admissions reader, meaning she saw all sorts of different Stanford applications, knows a heck of a lot. Lynn, Harvard Business School grad, a writer, and that's what we like at mbaMission. At the end of the day, an essay, what you will be judged on, or the piece of the application process that you still have the opportunity to impact is the written word, if you will. So you have to write a great essay. Lynn has a ton of experience doing that, as most of us do. Rachel, she used to work as a business reporter, the Associated Press, again, great writer. Susan, coming from a different perspective, more of a marketing perspective, but worked at National Hockey League, so that's sort of a big deal. As far as questions go, I'm going to now look at the chat a little bit. We can go through some of your questions. By all means, just sign up for our free consultation. You have a link there. You go to our website. It's on the front page. If you have any other questions, send them to info@mbaMission.com and you'll get them answered. But again, I don't want to sound like a broken record here. 30 minutes with a consultant is going to be valuable. Okay, a lot of talking. I speak very quickly because I'm from Boston. So let me go through this here. Okay. Okay, presentation looks blurry. Hopefully it is no longer blurry. Tech schools in Europe, probably Cambridge. There's some Spanish schools as well, but when you think tech, generally you think Cambridge. You could try SADE. That would probably, top of mind for me, Rotterdam maybe as well. Is a 3-year undergraduate degree accepted by U.S. schools? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's school by school. Which U.S. schools allow more non-traditional profiles with entrepreneurship experience? If you write the correct application, then it could be any school. There is no background that is either gets you in or keeps you out. You just have to explain why you need an MBA based on what you've done. And part of the reason you may need the MBA is because you want to actually change gears. You want to do something else. So from that perspective, it is worth thinking about your story, thinking about why an MBA makes sense for you. And if you can answer that question, then you're already on track to hopefully have some good results. 800 GMAT score with 6 years work experience. Will I get rejected from 10 to 20 ranked in US because of my high GMAT score? Which college should I prefer applying first? Let me understand this question here. Will I get rejected from 10 to 20 ranked in the US because of my high GMAT score? Okay, if you're saying to me you are concerned that if you apply to lower ranked schools and they see your 800 GMAT score, that's going to scare them off, believing that you'll go somewhere else. The short answer is no, because even with an 800 GMAT, we have had plenty of experience where folks with 800 perfect GMATs getting rejected from basically every place. Candidly, if Harvard Business School, MIT, Stanford wants to fill their class with 800 GMATs, they will. Again, it still is really all about your story. I will say other business schools also know you could get rejected. We are far past the world where a high GMAT score gets you in. I think you would then have to explain, okay, so what do you want to do? Why do you need an MBA? Is the GMAT score even relevant at this point? If you want to go into product management, if you want to go into consulting, is an 800 GMAT relevant? I don't know. You have to tell more of your story. Okay. Which European university do you think has the direct pipeline to real estate? Probably London Business School. Again, great city, as you know, but that would be probably my first suggestion. Probably maybe one of the Barcelona schools. I'm not quite sure about that. Good question though. Which top 10 best for agritech startup, agriculture, food industry career? I just had someone who looked at this. Very good question. Right now, Columbia actually has some nice things going in terms of agritech. I think Wharton has some nice things going in terms of agritech. Booth has some nice things going in terms of agritech. You could then take it in a different direction and go to like a University of Texas, which would be great. You go to Rice University in Houston as well. How do I identify schools with good social impact consulting career options? I would look at the employment report. I think that would be the first place to go, is and see where people actually end up. There are very few schools now that aren't talking social impact. Some better than others. Again, traditionally was Yale, but right now I think every school is doing it. MIT is doing it. There's some of the smaller schools that do it very well. If you've never heard of it, Babson University outside of Boston does it terrific. There's certainly Carlson does it really nicely. Let me see who else here. Berkeley Haas is certainly top of the pecking order here, but Emory also does a nice job. Georgia schools. Also, does a GMAT score of, say, 680 to 690 say good for top social impact schools? Schools, let me see. I can't read this. Hang on for 1 second. Okay. Also, does GMAT score of, say, 680 to 690 good for top social impact schools, especially if one has social impact work experience? Which schools would you recommend for such a profile? Great question. 680, 690 is still low. You're going to have to write a great story, not impossibly low by any means, which has social impact. Okay, you have a social impact work experience. Which schools would you recommend for such a profile? I'd probably try University of Michigan Ross. That is going to be a reach school. As far as what other schools that are more in that, what I would say mid-tier schools, I would probably, again, look at Georgia Tech even, and Emory. I think those are really interesting schools. And again, there's very few schools now that are going to say absolutely no. Probably that said, as I touched on it before, Duke, very strong program, though that GMAT's a little low. Babson, I love Babson. It's considered the number one entrepreneurship school, but it's doing a lot with social impact. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Okay. Get a show schedule for. Okay. Okay. From Albert, African with 325 GRE score with 4 years working experience in energy, looking to go into consulting. Which top 15 schools likely to be interested? I mean, they all may be interested with you. Honestly, I'd have to hear more about how the GMAT broke down, how the GRE broke down, but they could all be interested in you. I think when you say consulting, though, it gets really boring. So if we're talking energy consulting, that's one type of school. If you're talking strategy consulting, that's another school. I'd probably lean into the energy experience, a little bit more unique. When it comes to energy, again, Rice University in Houston, University of Texas, University of Washington, again, a lot of good schools up there. There's nothing in the top 15 that you can't do some energy consulting in. Okay, top institute for 10 years experience as a naval officer. Great. Looking to get into management consulting, GMAT 740. Experience include leading combat. Okay, great experience. I think that's it. You can really, you have to talk about the experiences that are like nobody else's. And such leadership experience is going to be really important. It's all going to be about your story. That's the thing. And what I always tell people, if you got a 740 GMAT, then there's going to be a guy with 750. And I don't want to necessarily say this applies to you, but the average GMAT score for a male Indian is 760. So if you are under 760, recognize that your GMAT's not getting you in. That, again, you have to write a great story. Could you recommend business schools that their strength is in strategy and human resource consulting in the US or Canada? Thank you. Again, that comes down to Brigham Young. If you've never seen Brigham Young before, it's a wonderful school in a great place, but I can certainly see going there. There is probably, I'm just trying to think here. Again, Emory is really strong. Michigan Ross is really strong. I think if you wanted to do all sorts of targets, likelies, and target likely and reaches, your reach school could be an MIT. Could you recommend business schools that, non-branded undergrad affect affect, mitigate? How? There's not a lot you can do with it. How were your grades? If your grades were good, then that may mitigate it. If they weren't good, you're probably going to have to take some sort of online course, which would be probably the Harvard Business School core. If you have the time to do that, that's really the number one program. Okay, is there any top school? Okay. Is there any top business school with strong relationships in mining or mining-related industries? Is a $2 trillion industry, but I haven't found much about MBA in mining. I would look at the Canadian schools. I don't think that there's much that's going to be happening in the U.S. I'm probably exaggerating. There's probably a few folks. There's always a few folks. University of Colorado, I bet, has a really good mining program. Which colleges are best at post-MBA goals consulting with a perfect GMAT score? All the top programs send a lot of people to consulting. If you want to go into the consulting factor, it'd be NCAT. I would probably get away from thinking about your GMAT score too much, honestly. It's not going to get you in, and it's not going to keep you out. Let's see what we got here. Thank you for answering these questions. You're welcome. Verbal 161, quant 164. Yeah, that's good. That's good. At this point, every school can be on your list. School for PE role with 5 years of hedge fund and what is that, American experience. At that point, you could look at a Chicago. I think that would be great, assuming it's one of those things. You could also look at a Cornell. I actually like Cornell a lot. Great investment banking program. Now, about a top 12 school, maybe. I would look at that. Any of the very top schools will help you get into PE. I'm a big believer that you can get into any industry from any school if you just work hard enough. That may be a reason to go to a school with a huge alumni base. But it's going to, again, whether at Harvard Business School, wherever you are, it's going to take effort. It's absolutely going to take effort. Private equity firms don't come to campus and recruit. Most of the people who go into private equity after business school have already been there. Best for healthcare and biotech. Best schools for healthcare and biotech, Duke. Yeah, Duke is probably the leader there. Duke is top there. The absolute leader for biotech is MIT. You have to think about Washington University in St. Louis. They have really strong in healthcare, really strong in biotech. Because St. Louis is just a real entrepreneurial city. I would actually, if I had to make a suggestion, of the schools you may not know, would be Washington, St. Louis, Olin. Are there any schools that are good for social impact in UK and Canada? If yes, then could you please tell me? I don't know, to be perfectly honest with you. Asset management, practically any school. Most schools are now doing asset management. Some better, some worse, obviously, but at this point, I'd look at probably any school. No worries. I appreciate you giving me the breakdown of the GMAT score, of the GRE score. Is there anything to be done to compensate for a lower quant score? Maybe some course? Yes. I think there's a few courses you could take. If you have the time, it'd be the Harvard Business School core program. 3 courses, a little bit more expensive, but it is the gold standard. And if you don't have time, there's a couple of courses. One is MBA Math, about 20 hours of your time. It's self-pacing. You'll get an A there. That's good, as well as Math for Managers, given by Berkeley Haas, an online course, again, very well respected. Let's see what we got here. How long before my target program date should I start availing admission consultant services? Listen, what we like to say is probably in the 6-month range. The reality is that my best, most successful applicants, clients have started with me in May, sometimes even earlier. I think what you can do if you're not ready to jump at that point, then start getting to know graduates, start getting to know programs right now. Okay. Top 20 US MBA, top Europe schools, looking for transition to tech from CPG. Probably again, and I know we keep on bumping into the same schools. When it comes to product management, again, Foster is an absolute great school. I love Foster. University of British Columbia, that certainly is worth looking at. Let me see what else. Oh, Georgia Tech. If you wanted to go, great schools would be Georgia Tech. Okay. Top 20 schools. I got about, let's do 2 or 3 more questions. I'm a deferred applicant. I want to go into healthcare and biotech. Which schools should I have on my list to achieve my post-career goal? We touched on this a little bit. Biotech, start off with MIT, look at Owen, look at Olin, probably even Booth, just because Chicago is such a big city, and they have a nice amount of biotech. There's some Booth Kellogg. I think those would be the places to look. Okay. Is GMAT waiver really does not affect your application chances? Ross has introduced a course in lieu of the GMAT score to qualify for the waiver. That's always a tough question. The reason that they're giving a GMAT waiver is because someone has shown their quantitative abilities in another way. If you have not shown your quantitative abilities in another way, and you ask for a GMAT waiver, then they say to themselves, do you really have the quantitative abilities? So it is really a double-edged sword there. Even if you get a GMAT waiver, that doesn't mean you need not show your quantitative abilities, because you do. And you have to think about other ways you can do that. I don't know about anything about the raw scores. Well, I think that that's it. I'm going to leave everyone with a reminder that by all means, come to our website, sign up for a 30-minute consult, whether it's with me or with one of my colleagues. We'd love to chat with you and probably answer whatever questions you might have. One last question from Adesh. Some people talk about selecting schools based on good professors as one criteria. How does one identify which professors are good? Talk to actual students. That you're going to need to do that anyway. What will set you apart that most people don't do is they talk to actual students. I would go on there, start getting a list of schools you're interested in, 2 to 3 students apiece, and then just start talking to them. And hopefully you have the time to do that. Okay, everyone. Great to get to know some of you. By all means, be back in touch. Bye now.